Well, let's take a look at the temple proper. Herod had built many impressive building projects, Masada, Caesarea, but the most impressive project of all was the temple renovation project in Jerusalem. Now, why do I say renovation? Well, the Jews feared, and with good reason, that Herod may tear down the temple and not rebuild it. Or he may rebuild it to some pagan god, dedicated to some foreign deity. So they asked him to renovate section by section the temple rather than raise it and start over. So it was actually a renovation project, and today the Jews refer to Herod's temple as the second temple, a renovation of Zerubbabel's temple. It's not the third temple. It's only the second temple. So they take very seriously the fact that this was a renovation project. Well, where was the temple located? Well, there are different theories, and the reason why there are some different theories is that Jewish archaeologists are not allowed to go up and excavate on the Temple Mount. That area is controlled by the Arab Muslims, and they have their reasons why they don't want excavations being done there. And so there's no concrete archaeological evidence for the location of the temple. Well, we do have information from historical sources, written sources, and some scholars differ. You can see in this diagram a fellow by the name of Kaufman thinks the temple was a little bit farther north than the Dome of the Rock. Now, we know for sure that the temple was inside the retaining walls that were built by King Herod. I mean, no one debates that. Why build the retaining walls if there's no temple inside of it? So that's certain. The temple is definitely inside that rectangular box created by King Herod. Many scholars put the location right at where the Dome of the Rock is today. And you can see in this diagram, the Dome of the Rock is outlined in blue, and it overlays the temple. So almost the exact same location. So the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome shrine, sits most likely right on the spot where the temple stood originally. So whenever you see that particular shrine, and it's easy to spot, you can think that's where the temple was originally located. Well, let's talk about the courts surrounding the temple. Now, there was the court of the Gentiles, and then there was the court of women, and then the court of Israel, and then the court of priests, and then the temple building proper. So a whole series of courts, but the sum total of all the courts made it the largest courtyard of any single temple anywhere in the world. It was some 14 hectares. So a huge set of courtyards. Well, let's look at this detailed diagram of some of the courts. Of course, the court of the Gentiles would be around the outside, but then we have the women's court, and then entering a little bit farther towards the temple, we have the court of Israel, and then the court of the priests inside that to our left in this diagram, and then the temple building proper. In this model of Jerusalem, we can see these courts, the court of women, the court of the priests, and the court of the Gentiles. Earlier, we had seen that the rabbinate of Israel had put up a warning sign in the entryway up into the Temple Mount today. And this is to warn people, don't enter in this area. The idea is that someone may inadvertently step inside the place which was originally the Holy of Holies. But back in Jesus' day, there was a warning sign as well. This one written to Gentiles. It was written in Greek, and this warned the Gentiles to not go beyond the court of the Gentiles. So they were to keep out of those areas that were restricted just for the Jews. John 10:23 says, "And Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon." Now, a portico is kind of a semi-outdoor area that has a series of columns. The rabbis used to like to teach at this portico, and we know that Jesus frequented it as well. So this was on the northern end of the courtyards of the temple and was considered to be the oldest part, the part that went all the way back to the time of Solomon. Now Herod lived in constant fear that his subjects would revolt against him, especially during the 3 annual feasts, where people's zeal and religious fervor was high. They would want to throw off the yoke of the Romans. And so Herod had soldiers stationed at the Antonia fortress, which was at the northwest corner of the Temple Mount complex. And from that fortress, they had easy access. You can see the stairwell down to the temple area, where they could dispatch soldiers very quickly to put down any type of riot or rebellion. Let's talk about the destruction of the temple. In 66 AD, a revolt broke out among the Jews. They no longer wanted to be under the yoke of the Romans, and so they rebelled against Rome. That rebellion continued for a number of years when in AD 70, Titus came, destroyed Jerusalem, and destroyed the temple. And that destruction was very extensive, and the Romans carried off items from the temple. And we see that in this close-up of the triumphal arch of Titus. And we see people carrying items from the Jewish temple there back to Rome, including a menorah that we see here, our lampstand. And to give you an idea what a menorah looks like, there's a new menorah that's been created and is on display in Jerusalem. This one has 7 branches to the lampstand. Mark 13:2 says, "And Jesus said to him, 'Do you not see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down.'" And so that's exactly what happened. When the Romans came under Titus, the stones were tossed down from above, and when the archaeologists dug these up, cleared the rubble, and they found these huge stones that had been thrown down from above, and they're still lining the street outside the walls of Herod's Temple Mount. So Jesus' prophecy about the destruction was literally fulfilled when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. Well, let's talk about the death of the 2 kings, and their deaths were very, very different. Let's talk about Herod's death first. Josephus records some things about Herod, him lamenting his upcoming death. He knew death was coming. He had been sick for quite some time, a very agonizing sickness, very painful. And so Antiquity 17 says, "I shall die in a little time, So great are my pains, which death ought to be cheerfully borne, and to be welcomed by all men. But what principally troubles me is this, that I shall die without being lamented, and without such mourning as men usually expect at a king's death. So Herod was lamenting the fact that at his death there would be no mourning. So in his typical despicable way of doing things, he came up with a plan to make sure that there was mourning at his death. So his plan was for Jewish leaders to be locked up at the Hippodrome in Jericho and to execute them at his death, so that there would be mourning in the land of Israel. Now, they wouldn't be mourning for him, but I guess that wasn't too important for King Herod. He just wanted to make sure that they were mourning. But fortunately, Herod's plans didn't come to fruition. After his death, his sister Salome and her husband Alexis did not carry out Herod's plans, and they set those Jewish leaders free from the Hippodrome in Jericho. Before his death, Herod had his son Antipater, who was in prison, and Herod was near death. Antipater mistakenly heard that his father had died and rejoiced. Herod heard of it and had Antipater executed. 5 days later, Herod died. So just a few days before his death, he had his son Antipater put to death, because Antipater rejoiced when he heard that his father was dead. So this is Herod's character. No respect for family, just a tyrant right till the day he died. Well, let's talk about the burial place of Herod. He was buried at a place called the Herodium. This is a hill just south of Jerusalem, not far from Bethlehem, out in the middle of the Judean desert. And from Jerusalem, you can see it if you're in the right position. And in this slide, we see there's really two hills, the Herodium that's indicated, and then another hill with a very flat top to it to the left. And so what Herod's engineers did, in order to raise the elevation of the hill on the right, they scraped off the top of the hill on the left and added that material to raise that hill on the right, so to make it an even more impressive mound. Here we can see that in a little more detail, where that hill on the left just has been scraped off, and then the Herodium being the one on the right. Now, we've already taken a look at the Herodium in a previous lesson, how it was luxuriously equipped with swimming pools and steam baths, and we're looking from the lower pool up to the mound of Herodium. Herodium was technically a fortress. It was one of Herod's desert fortresses that he could escape to should his subjects turn against him. But like his other building projects, the Herodium was fully equipped with swimming pools, steam baths, special places to eat with a triclinium. It was definitely done in his typical luxurious style. Here's a view of the Herodium, and we can see kind of inside that hill there was a series of 4 towers originally that's protruded above what we see today. But I want you to take note to the slope of the hill, and we'll talk about that in the story just in a little bit. Notice that there's no excavations on that slope that we're looking at. Well, we're looking down into the Herodium. You can see the 4 towers. The eastern tower is the most prominent, and We can see that in the top of our slide. This is an artist's representation of the Herodium. We have the monumental circular tower, that's the eastern tower. And then we have a double perimeter wall, number 2 in our diagram here. And there was an artificial rampart that kind of went around the base of the structure. Even had a garden inside there, living quarters, bathhouse number 6. And the entrance was actually underground. So it was very hard to get into Herodium. Usually the entryway is the weakest point of the defenses. Well, Herod overcame that by having an underground entrance to Herodium. We're looking at the interior of Herodium here. You can see some of the columns from the different courtyards, and Herod had even steam baths there. This is an artist's representation of what the Herodium would have looked like in all its glory, with the towers still intact sitting on that huge hill. And here we can see the subterranean entrance, so you would have to enter from down below. So it was very, very difficult to overcome this fortress of the Herodium. Here we see a diagram of Herodium, and Herod died down near Jericho, about 20 kilometers away, and so they brought his body up to Herodium, and there was a big procession that we see indicated by this red line on our diagram, and they brought Herod's body up to a mausoleum on the slope of Herodium. I'd like to tell you a little story of when I was in Israel in 2007. Just before I visited Israel at that time, the news broke that Herod's tomb had been found on Herodium. Now, the main archaeologist, Ehud Netzer, had been looking for Herod's tomb for 35 years. I mean, can you imagine? He just scoured the place, and then finally, in I think 2007, they found his tomb. So I wanted to go visit Herodium when I was in Israel at that time. And I wasn't part of a tour at that time, and so I got on a public bus because very few people visit the Herodium today. It's more in an Arab Muslim area. It's not frequented by tourists. So I just got on a regular Jewish bus, and it dropped me off literally in the middle of the Judean desert, and I had to walk in the last 2 kilometers. And so I approached the Herodium, walking in, and my view of the Herodium is pretty much what you see in this slide. Looking at the slope of Herodium, you couldn't see any excavations on the outside. And so I went up there. There was hardly any tourists. There were really no guides that you could ask questions. So I started just looking around, seeing if I could find Herod's tomb. And I knew there was a lot of underground tunnels at the Herodium. The Zealots had carved these tunnels as they got entrenched there because they knew the Romans were coming. And so I went through all these tunnels looking for Herod's tomb, and I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find it. And then later I saw on the news the one part of Herodium that I didn't view, which was on the backside of where I approached Herodium. They had done the excavation, and it's there they found Herod's mausoleum. And so I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't able to see that. But here's a picture showing the excavation in the area on the Herodium. And this is Herod the Great's tomb that they found. And The archaeologist Ehud Netzer was so thrilled when he finally found Herod's tomb after 35 years of looking. Well, Herod was buried with great pomp and circumstance. Jesus died a criminal's death and was buried in a tomb that was given by a friend. Instead of professional mourners, Jesus had Roman guards at his gravesite because there was a story that his followers might try to steal his body. So Jews asked the Romans to station guard there. So very different set of circumstances at their death. Luke 23:34 says, "But Jesus was saying, 'Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.'" So at his death, as Jesus hung on the cross, he prayed for those who were crucifying him. Herod, on the other hand, was having his own son executed. Jesus died so that he could give forgiveness and eternal life to those who would put their faith in him. He submitted to the will of the Father so he could extend love to even his enemies. Well, how do we want to finish? Will we be able to say, like Jesus, that we finished the work that the Father has sent us to do? Following Jesus may not lead us to a point in life where we have fortresses and palaces and seaports and an earthly kingdom. But if we follow in Jesus' steps in our leadership, we can be assured that we will finish well. And that's my prayer for all of us, that we would follow Jesus' leadership and finish well. I've enjoyed having you in this course, and I hope it's been helpful for you.